A very good morning to everyone. After a year's hiatus, we are delighted to be back amongst you all with the Graduate Research Meet 2021, organized by the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. It gives me immense pleasure to start this felicitous occasion in the presence of our esteemed keynote speaker, Professor Madhura Swaminathan, Professor and Head, Economic Analysis Unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, Professor T.G. Sitaram, Director, IIT Guwahati, Professor Sukanya Sharma, Professor and Head, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, faculty members, participants, and dear friends. GRM aims to bring together the contemporary graduate students from different academic institutions to exchange and share the research ideas on different areas of humanities and social sciences. We are consistently trying to maintain exemplary academic standards, for which we indeed are grateful to all of you. At IIT Guwahati, we are a multidisciplinary department, a center for research and teaching, which comprise 11 different disciplines: archaeology, development studies, economics, English, geography, history, linguistics, philosophy, political science, psychology, and sociology. With myriad of research interests and expertise, the department promotes interdisciplinary work in humanities and social sciences, offering projects, supervision, and fellowships aimed to attract students and researchers from diverse academic and cultural backgrounds. Therefore, we believe we are at a position to provide the best possible platform to host such an event. In the present scenario, where pertinent social issues are debated and discussed in a situation of highly biased social atmosphere, having a rigorous and holistic understanding seems all the more crucial. GRM aims to provide such a platform. With this, I would like to call upon our student convener, Kiran GSK, research scholar in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, to deliver the welcome address.
Thanks, Upasana. Hello, everyone. I take immense delight in welcoming you all to the two-day graduate research meet organized by the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati. In these times of uncertainty, it is my privilege to address this group of eminent speakers, chairpersons, and enthusiastic participants. We, the team of GRM, have come together after a gap of 1 year lost to the pandemic, but with the same vibrance of the 11 diverse disciplines of our department. The theme of this year, Humanities and Social Sciences in an Age of Crisis, reflects, among many, the global crisis our world is facing. The ongoing tumult of the global pandemic, struggles against climatic change, and societal pandemonium of injustices. On behalf of the GRM Organizing Committee, let me extend my warm wishes to each one of you present today. I thank our Honorable Director, Professor T.G. Sitaram, under whose guidance the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences has been garnering prestigious achievements. I also thank Professor Madhura Swaminathan for taking off from her busy schedule to grace us with a keynote address. I thank the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences and especially Professor Sukanya Sharma, head of the department, for her work, commitment, and creativity in making this meet possible. She has been passionately devoting her time and efforts to support our academic endeavors and has been a constant source of inspiration. This meet is a product of extensive collaboration, and I'm grateful to everyone who gave us their time, views, and opinions to talk through the themes and ideas. On behalf of the organizing team, it's my honor to welcome you all to the Graduate Research Meet 2021. I do so with a sense of admiration at the radical and imaginative ways in which the conference participants have engaged with this year's theme. To everyone who's presenting in this GRM, and everyone whose work has influenced this meet, welcome. We look forward to building friendships, having discussions, and talking together with you over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiran. Moving forward, I request Professor Sukanya Sharma, Head of the Department, Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, to say a few words. Over to you, ma'am.
A very good morning to all of you. And it's a wonderful moment today for the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, because after a long break today, we have come together semi-virtually. There are students, faculty members in front of me in the hall, which really is so such a moment of delight that after this period of the pandemic, it is possible today that we discuss, we share ideas. Humanities and Social Sciences in Age of Crisis is the title of this graduate research meet, which is the seventh meet. We organize this annually, and it was in 2020 that due to COVID situations, we could not organize this, but we have again come back this year. And this is a special event for us because it is an event organized solely by the students. Faculty members are there as for guidance, for as mentors, but it is primarily the students who decide on the topic, on the various issues, the panels. So it has been really hard work from a group of very committed students in these trying times who have put this whole session, who has put this whole program together. We had received around 500 applications, and from there we have now come down to there is a process of shortlisting, and after we review the abstracts, we have selected around 70 odd abstracts. It was around 90, but some people have dropped out. So it will be a 2-day session in which students from all across India will be sharing their ideas and thoughts. So it is their research which they will be sharing. It is a meet of graduates organized by graduates. It is also very important for us because this also helps us to train our own PhD scholars leadership skills of working in groups, of sharing, and this also connects us. So many of these GRM participants in the last few years have come back to us as research scholars, have joined us in the department. And of late, we also have a new faculty member in the department who was our GRM participant. Now that is really exciting, and that is really showing us how effective the meet has been. And a warm welcome to Professor Swaminathan, a warm welcome, Professor Sitaram, Director of the Institute, and Dr. Bodhisattva Sengupta and Dr. Mithilesh Jha, who have been with the students all along, Kiran and his group, who have been putting all this together. And I hope it will be an experience again to share, to remember, and your presence is extremely encouraging for us. Thank you so much, Professor Swaminathan, for accepting our request. Thank you so much, Director Sir, for accepting our request and in your busy schedule to come forward and give us this few moments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your encouraging words. Moving on, I now request Professor T.G. Sitaram, Director, IIT Guwahati, to kindly share his thoughts with us.
Namaste. Very good morning to all of you. On behalf of IIT Guwahati, I welcome all the participants, and also in particular Professor Madhura Swaminathan, Head Economic Analysis Unit, ISI Bangalore, and also Professor Mahendra P. Lama from the School of International Studies, JNU. Professor Bodhisattva Sen Gupta, Mithilesh Kumar Jha, and Professor Shakuntala Mahanta. I'm very happy to be part of this GRM 21, titled as Humanities and Social Sciences in Age of Crisis. Before I come to that, I would like to say the humanities and social science subjects are very key for particularly the research community. Kindly mute yourself, please. The humanities and social science provide a very broad understanding of the world we live in and how people can participate in active and informed citizens with high level of skills needed for the 21st century. So this discipline, started in IITs. Most of the IITs now have the humanities as part of that, so that engineers and scientists should know what the people want, what the society wants. So this connection is very, very key, very important. So the humanities help us to understand through their languages, history, culture, and also they foster social justice and equality. I'm very happy today Professor Madhura Swaminathan is going to talk about the inequality crisis. And I'm very glad to announce that IIT Guwahati Humanities HSS department starting a new master's program in liberal arts from July 2022. Senate of IIT Guwahati has wholeheartedly supported the proposal of the HSS department. And this liberal arts degree includes the study of history, literature, writing, philosophy, sociology, psychology, creative arts, and many more. This is definitely designed to help the young people who are assembled today and for GRM 21 to formulate compelling arguments, thought processes, and communication, and also solve real world problems, joining hands with engineers, designers, and scientists. Studying liberal arts can help you and equip you with many important things where you will be developing soft skills such as creativity, collaboration, effective communication, critical thinking. I'm very happy that broadly our students should start looking at questioning, researching, analyzing, evaluating, and communicating. This is very key for their success, and they should apply these skills to investigate in the events, whatever chosen field of research, development, issues, and phenomena, both historical and contemporary. So this is very, very critical. So I think this is a very high time when our national government has announced the National Education Policy 2020, emphasizing the multidisciplinary research. I feel and request all the HSS people to come forward, lead the teams of engineers and scientists which are relevant to solve the problems which are relevant to the society. So the advances in understanding the value of a system or a humanities, in themselves, they can also form the focused and instrumental research projects jointly with scientists and engineers and also with the designers. So you have a fantastic opportunity at IIT Guwahati where we are reasonably, good number of faculty in all these areas. So join hands, very similar to the way the Sustainable Development Goal course is being offered to all the undergraduate courses. I would like to emphasize that 9 faculty members have come forward to offer this course on Sustainable Development Goals to all the engineering graduates, 1,000 students, which is a phenomenon. Even UNEP appreciated our effort in doing so. This is a very, very unique course which is being offered in any of the, universities. So before I close my talk, I would like to say something about the title what you have chosen, Humanities and Social Science in the Era of Crisis. I tend to disagree. The crisis has to come to the mankind. There is nothing. So if you only refer the COVID-19 as a crisis, I think India has really played very well and came winningly, and also it has given an opportunity so that we can now give the vaccine to the whole world. 96 countries have actually receiving the vaccine manufactured in India. So this pandemic definitely has put us into disadvantage and also problems and even worry and scare among the people's mind. But at the same time, it has also given us a lot of opportunities. So to research, to do things which we were never used to do, particularly the use of technology in education. I think this should not have happened in India at least. So we have got at least 10 to 15 years of jump time to utilizing the online platforms very, very effectively for learning, uh, teaching and learning. So the world actually is in a very better position today with all the kind of new technology whether mankind has never seen before. We have all the access. So let's not look at it in a negative way as world is in a crisis. So the crises come and go. We will win over them. I think we are better pictured ourselves than the human beings are really can overcome all these difficulties. The difficulties have to come, whether it is climate change, political turmoils, migration, unemployment, uninterrupted economic functioning. All that will be there forever as long as the mankind is surviving on this mother earth. Okay, because when human beings are there, all are the cause of them. See, who are the cause for climate change? The same people. Political turmoil, same people. Migration, same people. It is all created by us only. And also we are trying to solve this also. Similarly, the COVID-19 as well. This is the perception I have. I thought, I'll just share that with young minds rather than looking at negatively. Let them look at the positively. How did we really win over this COVID? Anyway, with the brief of this, and I'm very happy to tell you that we are also started a school of business, and many faculty from humanities are participating in it. So we are going to start the school of business starting from July 2022. The unique program of the business school is we are going to offer a minor in business development, a minor in finance, minor in marketing, or minor in HR, whatever it is, for all the undergraduate students, BTech and B design, whatever discipline they come from. So they can become entrepreneurs and they can become their own, they can create their own startup company, and then they become job creators than job seekers. With these words, I congratulate humanities department for coming up with this, coming back with the GRM 21 seminar, and I request all the students to deliberate very critically the word I said, whether are we in crisis or we will be able to really, such a crisis was never there in the world before. You don't know. I think you need to answer that. You are the experts. I actually call upon you to discuss and deliberate this very, very critically and come out with answers very positive. With these brief remarks, I again thank the organizers, particularly the HSS department head, Shakuntala Mahanta, sorry, Professor Sharma, to invite me to be for this event. I'm very happy to be there. I also wish the GRM 21 a success. Namaste, Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful words. And I now request Dr. Bodhisattva Sengupta, faculty in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, and also the faculty convener, Graduate Research Meet 2021, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Upasana. So at this moment, on behalf of the team, we would like to express uh, our sincere gratitude to all people who have made GRM 21 possible. Uh, First, we are grateful to Professor Madhura Swaminathan from ISI Bangalore and Professor Mahendra P. Lama, Jawaharlal Nehru University, for agreeing to deliver keynote and valedictory addresses. And we must express our deep gratitude for Professor T.G. Sitaram, Director, IIT Guwahati, for agreeing to be present during the inaugural session, and at every step he provided the necessary encouragements. Thanks, sir. Now, of course, the event is all about students. We express our thanks to the participants for submitting the abstracts, submitting the full papers, and finally finding time to presenting their work. Without you, GRM 21 is not a success. Thanks. We are indebted to the administration of various sections and centers of IIT Guwahati for providing us with the necessary support. We would like to thank the Humanities student team. Again, this is, as the speakers have already mentioned, this is a student-oriented conference. So the HSS student team worked very hard to make GRM 21 happen. It is all their credit. Finally, I would like to thank Professor Sukanya Sharma, HOD HSS. She conceived the idea that GRM 21 must happen this year and constantly provided the necessary guidance and support. On the same vein, our faculty colleagues extended their wholehearted cooperation at various stages of GRM 21. So a word of thanks for them. And the team would also like to thank the HSS Department Office staff for working tirelessly, at least over 1 month, past 1 month. And finally, we are obliged to our past sponsors. We did not need any fund this year, but our past sponsors, ICSR New Delhi, ICSR Shillong, Oil India Limited, Northeast Council, IOCL, NRL, Exim Bank, and Canara Bank. We hope to receive their continuous support during future as well. Again, on the behalf of the team, we would like to express our deep sense of gratitude to everybody who have made GRM 21 happen. It's a difficult time, it was a big challenge, but thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, moving forward, we are elated to have with us Professor Madhura Swaminathan to deliver the keynote address. And for that, I request Dr. Mithilesh Kumar Jha, faculty in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Guwahati, and also the faculty convener, Graduate Research Meet 2021, to introduce our speaker to the audience.
Thank you, Upasana. It's my pleasure. Okay, just. Thank you, Upasana. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to all to Professor Madhura Swaminathan. And on behalf of GRM 21 team, I would like to extend my warm welcome to all the participants who will be presenting in the course of next 2 days. And as our director sir has told us about the crisis and how we look at it, And I hope this deliberation over 2 days will allow us to think of crisis not merely as a kind of challenge, but also an opportunity to think innovatively or creatively, and that we have seen in the course of in the course of 1 year in different spheres of life, that how we try to reconcile and respond to the crisis that is before us. So I hope in this spirit we will continue our deliberation. I'd like to speak briefly about Professor Madhura Swaminathan and her contribution in the field of economics. Professor Swaminathan is with Economic Analysis Unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. She has a doctorate in economics from the University of Oxford and works on the issues pertaining to food security, agriculture, and rural development. Her major publications include Weakening Welfare, the Public Distribution of Food in India, 2000, and with V.K. Ramachandran, Agrarian Studies, Essay on Agrarian Relations in Less Developed Countries in 2002, Financial Liberalization and Rural Credit in 2005, Socioeconomic Surveys of 3 villages in Andhra Pradesh with V.K. Ramachandran and Vikas Rawal in 2010, and Dalit Households in Village Economics with V.K. Ramachandran in 2014. She has also published in journals like Economic and Political Weekly, Oxford Bulletin of Economics and Statistics, Cambridge Journal of Economics, Journal of Development Studies, and World Development, among others. She was a member of the Government of India's high-level panel on long-term food security. She has been elected to serve on the Committee of Development Policy of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations for the period of 2013 and 15. At present, she is also the chairperson of MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, Chennai. Now, with these words, I would invite Professor Swaminathan to deliver her address. Thank you.
Thank you. So can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Yes.
Professor Sitaram, Professor Sukanya Sharma, and other faculty of IIT Guwahati Humanities, Social Sciences, but most important of all, Kiran and all the other students who are really both from IIT and others who are attending. Good morning to all of you from a rather wet and windy cyclonic Chennai. I think let me first just say that I'm going to talk about inequality. I'm not, and I'm going to take a little long-term view, because I think what Professor Sitaram is saying is we're not talking about short-term crises, and I'll come a little bit to the COVID, but that is not really my intention. It's to take a little long-term view of what has been happening in the Indian economy. And I should have added in my title that my focus is really going to be on the agrarian economy of India. So the inequality crisis in the agrarian economy. And I don't have any PPT or tables and things like that. Let me say that right away, because I think we have students from very diverse backgrounds here. And I would like to explain what I'm saying. I'd also like to say that I'm drawing on material that I put together recently for a chapter in a forthcoming book on agricultural India. It's called A Hard Time, which has been edited by Professor R. Ramkumar of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And in fact, I asked him yesterday, when is the book coming? Can I recommend it to the students? Because I think it will give quite a good perspective on the last 30 years or so of what has been happening in the Indian rural economy. But having said that, let me start with I want to take an even longer sweep and look at the sort of the last century, as it were, and what happened in the Indian economy. And I think why that's important, particularly for students, is sometimes we get caught in the nitty gritty of today or yesterday or the inflation rate of the last few months. But I think we need to take sometimes stock of what has happened. So if we take the 20th century, early 1900 to the end of the early 2000, and look at the agricultural economy, there are two very clear phases. The first, which is sort of 1901 to 1947 till independence, is a period of agricultural stagnation. I'm going to, describe a little bit of the growth in agriculture, the economy in terms of output, and then come to the aspects of implications for inequality. And when you take the second half of the 20th century, 1947 or 50 to 2001, you see there's been remarkable growth. So yes, we may have problems today, but I think sometimes it's useful to take stock of a longer term period. And this work is very interesting, that this kind of historical data has been put together, and you'll see a very similar pattern for India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, because after all, we were all part of the same, colonial region. I would like to mention a reference here by Professor Kurosaki. He's an econometrician at Tokyo University, who has really made a lot of effort to put together comparable data for all the countries of South Asia. Now, so I think the first point I want to make is that there is no doubt that in terms of the growth of productive forces, in terms of the growth of production and productivity, the second half of the 20th century in India saw a remarkable shift as compared to the first half of the colonial period. Now let us come to the post-colonial period, the 1947 or 50 onwards. And I was looking at the data and the material yesterday, and also as I said, to Ram Kumar's introduction for his book. And I think there are just three broad phases, again, to look at the agricultural economy, and a lot of other things fit in, as I will argue, with that chronology. The first phase, the 1947 till pre-65, is sort of what we call the pre-Green Revolution phase in India. And then we could think of 1965-66 till about 1991. So the next 25 years, as it were kind of the peak of the growth in terms of the productive forces. And the third phase, 1991 to today, although again, there we can look at sub-phases and all that, but the third phase is that of the liberalization era, the post-1991 economic reforms, structural adjustment, financial liberalization, trade liberalization, and so on. Now, when we look at these three phases, as I said, we can have year-to-year changes, we can have sub-periods within these three phases, but I think the character of the economy and the economic growth and its implications for the rural population and for inequality are quite different or distinct in these three phases. And that's why it's useful to focus on the broad picture here. And one of the themes that is running through this explanation of what happened, what was different in these three phases. Economic policy was very different. And the engines of growth, if you like, who was driving changes in the rural economy was very different in terms of the role of the public sector and the private sector. I think when we go to questions of inequality, what we have to ask is, not just Indian economy has recovered fast, it's growing at this rate or that rate, but who, on what basis, which sectors are growing, who is investing, and then we can see who is benefiting, and that is the story that I want to tell you. Led this growth in the different phases, and whom did it benefit or whom did it not benefit? And I think that's the inequality question: who got left out? So let me not talk much about the pre-Green Revolution phase. I really want to focus on the Green Revolution and post-Green Revolution or liberalization phase. So I think what is very important is in the mid 60s, and I think most of you are born at the start of liberalization, so you don't even know about the earlier 25 years. There was a crisis, and that is what led to the Green Revolution. So yes, the crisis can lead to certain important policy changes. We know a foreign exchange crisis led to the liberalization policies. And we hope the COVID crisis will lead to a change in employment policies, but that's not happened yet. So in the mid 60s, there was a crisis in terms of food production in India. And we were almost on what is called a ship to mouth existence. Grains were coming in on ships from the United States, and they were being used to feed the people. And there were many options at this time, but the path that was selected of investing in technological change. There was a technological change-led growth, but this technological change, the Green Revolution technology as we know it and its variants, was spurred by public investment and public policy. That's very important because it's very distinct from the liberalization phase. And I must say something here that, whatever generalization you make about India, someone can always find a counter example somewhere. So I think that's not the point. The point is, since I have been teaching for many years, since I'm older than all of you, I want to give you a kind of, what lessons, when we look at a longer term perspective, what do we see? What are some of the key changes between an earlier period and now? And I think that this public investment-led technological change-led growth in agriculture led to remarkable changes in output. As all of you know, we doubled production of wheat in about 10 years, and rice production, everything is at record highs now. Very interestingly, even after COVID in 2020, the monsoon season, what we call Kharif in agriculture, Kharif 2020 had one of the record production, but not incomes. So I'll come to that later. Production is not the only thing we're going to look at. But I think it's important to see that there was economic growth, there was agricultural growth, growth in output, growth in yield, led by public investment in research, in agricultural extension, price support, public support for seed production, for fertilizer imports, whole gamut of policies that received subsidies in agriculture for purchase of machinery and so on, whole gamut of policies. But one thing that was left untouched was the underlying agrarian structure, in particular, the structure of land holdings, the very unequal structure of land holdings in India. And I'll be talking about that a little later, but let me just flag that for now. And I think that's, if later on we can have some questions if any of you want to know, numbers and things like that, I can talk about it, but I'm not going to go into that. So I think it's very useful when we're talking about public policy today to read some of the debates. And I hope some of you will read many of our leading economists like K.N. Raj and Raj Krishna, who were writing from the mid 60s to the mid 80s and discussing the alternative paths that India could have followed. And one of them was the path that China had taken, a major land reform. And India did not. It chose not to take the path. So I think we must understand that it wasn't, just it happened. It was a very conscious decision, uh, and there were arguments on all sides by different economists. And with a few exceptions, Kerala and West Bengal, parts of Tripura, parts of Kashmir, with a few exceptions, land reform was a failure in India. So we did not deal with the underlying economic structure. And many of you, I know, are not economists. You're studying other issues like caste. You know that this underlying economic structure is highly discriminatory in terms of caste, and I'll come to that later on. So these underlying ownership of agricultural land, which forms the basis, social and political power, and still in rural India, this agrarian structure was left, was tinkered with, but not, changed in a very big way. And I think uh, it was felt that with technology, with organizational change, such as a promotion of agricultural extension, some of the problems of agriculture could be solved. And mind you, the problem of production was solved. But I think the tendency for inequality to increase, to be started during the immediate Green Revolution, post-Green Revolution phase. And in the words of Mohan Rao and Sarva Storm, many oft-quoted words, the impact of the Green Revolution was very unequal across time and space. Sorry, time, space, and agrarian classes. So by space, he's talking about regions of India. We know the Green Revolution started in Punjab, in Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, and left out many parts of Eastern India, including Assam. Many of you are sitting today. And then it was only in the 1980s you had the late Green Revolution, or the diffusion of Green Revolution to West Bengal, and still, but parts of Bihar, Odisha, and Assam, although they have seen agricultural growth, are still lagging behind parts of Western India. So the implications or the spread of Green Revolution technology was unequal across regions, across crops. Not surprisingly, better off agricultural regions, the regions with irrigation, gained compared to other regions. I'll give some examples of its implications as I go on. And other parts of India, there was not enough investment, including public investment, lagged behind. And this had implications for different agrarian classes, for different different sections of the rural or agrarian economy. So let me turn now from this sort of broad description of the early phase of growth in India, the 65 to 91. Again, as I said, there are variations within this phase. And if you actually read an agricultural economics textbook, they'll give you a lot of disaggregation. But I think broadly, in terms of public policy-led, public investment-led agricultural growth, this was a phase. And by the end of the phase, we start seeing these inequalities emerge. Now we come to the second phase, which I think is continuing. Many of you might have seen in the last few days, there were a lot of write-ups about 30 years of liberalization. So 1991 and 2021, we're kind of celebrating 30 years of economic liberalization. We had a sea change in policies. And at the core of that, again, there are a lot of variations, industrial policy, financial policy, banking policy, trade policy. But the core of that was let private markets play, private sector play a bigger role. And again, this was stated, very openly and publicly. So these, I mean, again, I'm just trying to see. Yesterday, I saw a very, interesting quote by Manmohan Singh. I mean, he was quoted. Okay, maybe I have. Yeah, basically saying that let the private sector be the engine of growth for the next phase. Now, it goes without saying that private sector led investment or private sector led growth is going to have its own trajectory. Is it going to work for, or is it going to bring benefits to the most marginalized, to the most discriminated in the rural economy? We'll see that it hasn't. So this was a very clear choice again, and I want to make this very clear that when you go back and you look at the statements, of course there was push from external players and so on, but it's a very clear choice made by the Indian policymakers of that time, the Prime Minister and many others, to go for a shift from public sector led to private sector led growth. And of course, the private sector is going to make profits. We can see that in the case of vaccines today. So whether it's the pandemic or whether it's any other, the private sector has its own motives, has its own objectives, and it's not going to do things out of altruism or some other motive. And what we see in terms of inequality is that the period of liberalization, the 1991 to 2021, has seen an exacerbation of rural inequalities. And that is what I'm going to spend a little bit time on. I'm going to give some examples of that and some implications of that. Now, I know yeah, okay, I found the Manmohan Singh quote now, but perhaps that's not, we can forget that. Let me just give a sort of concluding statement to what this part of the lecture, and then I'll move on to discuss the kinds of inequalities that persist in rural India and how they're changing, what are the implications. So I don't think I'm going to speak for 1 hour. That's a little too much. So before going to this, if we look at the whole, in summary, if you look at the liberalization phase, there's no doubt that the fact of the unequal agrarian structure, the fact that the unequal, whatever policy has come, has been built on it. Public investment led or public sector led might have tried to address it, but there's no way the private sector led growth is going to address that directly on its own. And we see that as a result of this, the development of agriculture or capitalism in agriculture in India is uneven and differentiated. Okay, I'm quoting here from a paper by my colleague V.K. Ramchandran. So the pattern of agricultural or agrarian development across India is highly uneven. And that's why I said at the beginning, whatever I say, you may find one counterexample here or one counterexample. I think that's not the point. The point is to take the big picture. And these, I think the crucial sentence I want to give here is that these features of unevenness are manifested in almost every socio-economic outcome. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in a minute. So let me, as I said, if some of you want numbers on the growth performance of over these different periods, I can talk about it later. I can give you examples. in the lectures. But let me move on to inequality. So what is inequality? Some of you I know are not economists over here. So the difference, inequality, when we talk about inequality, we're talking about differences. We're talking about gaps between those at the top and those at the bottom, between the richest and the poorest. And I'm going to use one measure of inequality in some of my examples, which is called the Gini coefficient. Many of you might have heard of it. It's become quite common, which is basically takes account of every person in society and then tries to get a measure of this gap in incomes, or gap in educational attainments, or gap in land ownership. And this Gini coefficient ranges from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100. So if the Gini coefficient is 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, so 20, 30%, we may say it's relatively low inequality. If the Gini coefficient is 1 or 100, means highly unequal, totally unequal society. And if the Gini coefficient is 0, it means everybody has the same level of land, the same level of income, perfectly equal society. Of course, we don't have any of that in the world. But anyway, this is the two extremes. So when I give the Gini, the closer to 0, the better the situation, the more equal the situation, the closer to 1, the more unequal. So let me start with land, which is the critical asset, remains the critical asset in rural talking about today. What is the distribution of land? What is it's highly unequal, that we know. So according to, if we take the Gini coefficient measure of the ownership of land holdings, so we take all rural households in India and we rank them from 0 ownership to the highest ownership, the Gini coefficient is above 0.7. It's about 7.374. Okay, this is a 2003-4 number. We may have a number for recent period, but it's likely to not be very different. So, as I said, anything above 0.4 or 0.5 is highly unequal. We are saying here the Gini coefficient is about 0.7. So very, very unequal. The ownership of land in India has been and continues to be highly unequal. There are some states where it went up a little bit. There are some states which did a little better. So if you look at state level changes, or we go down even further, we may find some variations. But if we take the broad picture, all India, it was 0.73 in 1960-61. It's 0.74 in 2003-4. So there you have a 40-year period and hardly any change in the Gini coefficient. Okay, it's probably a worsening in many places, because we know that as population increases and more landless population increases, this inequality is going to increase. Now, coming from the Indian Statistical Institute, I have to spend a few minutes on data with you. So one of the things about data on inequality, and this is any inequality, be it inequality of income or assets or consumption, any inequality that any of you are going to measure, all the estimates we have in India are on the low side. They're underestimated. And why is that? It's for two reasons. One is, not surprisingly, the rich, whether it's the rich in terms of land or the rich in terms of income, the rich always underreport. If you go to a rich person in a village, or you come to a rich person in a city and say, tell me all your assets, you're not going to get the correct answer. So it is, and this is all worldwide, it's not just in India. So invariably, unless you get data like taxes, we assume you don't lie to the taxman. The inequality is always going to be underestimated, because the rich are always going to underreport their data in surveys. Second, and this is very important, land, as I said, I still believe that ownership of land is the basis not only of agricultural economy, but of society, of political power, of caste structure in India. That the survey on land ownership actually undercounts the rich. Now, I'm not going to get into the details, but there is a paper by Deepak Kumar in the Review of Agrarian Studies, 2016, I think. And you can see that it's systematically undersampling of the rich. So we are sampling in our sample survey fewer households from the rich, and then those we sample are going to underreport what they actually own. So on both counts, whatever I'm talking about inequality today is actually from national statistics is an underestimation. And therefore, I'm going to give you an example from some village studies, which I have also been associated with, done by the Foundation for Agrarian Studies in Bangalore, fas.org.in, for those of you who are interested. And here, there was no undercounting of the rich. Most of these surveys were census surveys, so they covered every household and made sure actually to cover the richest, the biggest landlords, whatever. So there's no counting. There still may be underreporting. Even though it's a small group of surveyors, still it could be, but at least one of those errors we have corrected for, which are there in national statistics. And I just want to give you an example. Of 25 villages which have been surveyed, in several of them, I'll give one example. For example, a village in Guntur district in Andhra Pradesh, which is discussed in the book that was kindly mentioned at the beginning. The top 5% of households. So we're ranking all households in the village in terms of the extent of land ownership. Obviously, those who don't own land are at the bottom, then those who start owning land, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 1, 2, 3 hectares, and then going up to 10, 20, 30, 100, whatever. So when we rank all the households by extent of ownership, the top 5%, the biggest landowners, owned 54% of the land in the village. Okay. Many of you might have seen Thomas Piketty's books about wealth inequality, the top 5% and the top 1% and things. And you can see that Indian economy is beginning to look highly unequal. And this was the case in a large number of villages, 30, 40%. I can share this paper later for those of you who want references. There were a few exceptions. I must mention that. There was a village in quite close to Bangalore in Kolar district, which is a largely peasant economy, not many landless households, where the top 5% owned about 26%. And there was a village in North Bengal, quite close to all of you, in Kuch Bihar district, bordering Assam, Kalmandaspuri village, where again the top 5% owned about 20% of land. And that is because that was an area where land reform had been implemented. So there are exceptions, but the big picture that you see is top 5% in a village controlling 50% or 40, 50% of the land, and usually it's the best quality land. What about the other side? Because as I said, when we look at inequality, we look at the top and the bottom. The top bottom 50% of households, so half the population of a village, owned zero land in several villages, including this village, Anantavaram, a village in Rajasthan in Ganganagar, a village in where else? In many other villages in Telangana, it is 1%, in Western UP, 2%, 3%, 5%. So the bottom 50% are owning 0 to 5% of land. You can see how this is going to affect their opportunities, their livelihood opportunities, their political and social power, opposition status in a village. Now, let me move on to a little bit about, but you may say that I want to talk about incomes, but before that, let me just say a little word about other assets. Land is the most important asset, but you may say that this is unfair because landless households have livestock, they may have housing, uh, they may have other durable assets. So let us take all assets of rural households. And if you take all assets, okay, then you find that in 2011-12 and 18-19 is very similar. The Gini coefficient was about 0.67. So instead of being 0.7, it's become a little less than that. It's 0.6 something. Okay. So when we take other assets, which the landless may own into account, the inequality is slightly moderated, but it's still very, very high. Now I want to talk about inequality in incomes. Please tell me if I'm going on too long and it's boring, I can stop it anytime. Huh? Okay. Now, when we talk about income inequality, again, let me start with a very important point for most of you students. There are no official statistics based on household surveys of income minimum. This is quite shocking, but it's true. We have a rather good statistical system compared to many countries, though it has deteriorated over the last decade or so. But we do not have income surveys. And all the discussions that many of you may have read about or will read about, say, of poverty in India, is not based on income. It's based on consumption expenditure. And there's a very big difference between expenditure and income. If I could see you if I was in the auditorium, this is a question I would have asked you to answer, but since I'm far away, and that is the difference between income and expenditure is saving. I don't spend my salary. I save a large part of it, my children's education, or for my retirement, for buying a house or something else. So the rich save and the poor borrow. So if you compare the expenditure, you are going to inevitably have a lower level of inequality than when you look at income, because the poor have to eat. What happened during the pandemic? There was no employment. People have borrowed money to eat. So if you look at their expenditure, it was not zero. Yes, they had to beg or borrow and buy some food. But if you compare income, they probably a large number of households didn't have income. We know about that. So using expenditure, which has been done to measure poverty in India and which has been done for decades in the international literature, gave a feeling that India was not a very unequal country when you looked at expenditure. Our inequality in terms of what we call monthly per capita expenditure has been about 0.3 or 30%. This is the last number we have from about a decade ago, 2011-12. And in Latin America, the Gini coefficient is 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, Uruguay, and Brazil and Argentina. So we were feeling quite happy in India that we are not as bad as Latin American countries. Worldwide, they were attacked for being highly unequal countries, whereas we have given the impression that India, South Asia are not very unequal. But that's because the wrong variable was being used, if you ask me. And now, in the late 90s, a sort of decade after liberalization, I didn't talk about it earlier, but when we look at the phases of within liberalization, the late 90s to early 2000s was one of the worst agrarian crises. Sharp fall in income fluctuations, price fluctuations, farmer suicides, and the government had to wake up. And one of the things that the government of India at that time did was to initiate what is called a situation assessment survey of farmers, SAS. So SAS, which is the most recent SAS has just come out, is a survey of agricultural or farming households which collects data on income. It's the only source, a national sample survey source of income in India. It's including all the land lists, but never mind. What does it tell us about the farming households? Now, if you look at the SAS data on income inequality, the Gini coefficient for income inequality is about 0.05 or 50%. Okay? So in other words, the consumption expenditure inequality is about 0.3, and now income inequality is higher at 0.5. But obviously, this is not the true picture, because all those who are not farmers, that is the landless laborers, manual workers, construction workers, they have been left out of the SAS survey. So if you bring them in, inequality is naturally going to worsen. So let me take another example here from the village level data that I was telling you about. So we have calculated income inequality. There are a couple of papers I have published in the Review of Agrarian Studies on this. Have calculated income inequality for household income in the villages that we studied. And what do we find? Income inequality in this village I was telling you about in Andhra, Guntur, where highly unequal land ownership, the Gini coefficient was 0.6. So 0.5, 0.6, 0.68, these are the kind of measures of income inequality that we got in a large number of villages. Again, in some villages, like the one I mentioned to you in Kolar district, income inequality was a little lower, 0.45, but nothing less than 0.4. So 0.45, 48 till about 0.7. Now, this is 25 villages. That's not India. India is huge. But I think the point here is that there are very limited sources of data on household income in India. So to understand the extent of inequality, we have to rely on all types of data that we have, and the village level data come in handy here because they tell you and they show very clearly certain patterns of inequality. Just to give you one example, again, I don't want to go on and on about it, is the level of income inequality is generally higher in irrigated villages. Now, that's not surprising. So villages with more productive agriculture, villages with higher incomes from agriculture, villages which may be larger, more prosperous, are villages which are more unequal. So the benefits, it's very clear. This is what I'm trying to, the benefits of growth. And I want to emphasize here, the Indian economy is not one of a zero growth. We have not had some of the crises like Europe or other countries, developed countries have had of a low growth situation. But the benefits of this growth have been very, very unequally distributed. And that is the story that I'm trying to tell you with some of these measures of inequality. So in less irrigated villages, in dryland areas and poorer areas, situation in terms of inequality is a little bit, not great. As I said, 0.45 is nothing to feel happy about, but it's not as bad as in some of the better off regions. I want to turn to my last point actually. There are also other inequalities within agricultural households. I'll just say a few sentences about it. I won't give you the details. See, when we talk about agrarian crisis, it's very important. Crisis of what? And I started with that, crisis for whom? It's not a generalized crisis. As I told you, we've had different phases of production growth, even though the last decade was not a good one. But after COVID in Kharif 2020, we had record production. So it's not a crisis of agricultural production. Output is growing. Many people, or at least some people, are benefiting. but it's a crisis of incomes. Incomes are not growing adequately for the large majority. So I think this is the question that one needs to, because if you look at any one statistic like output growth, someone would say, what crisis are you talking about? Although, as I said, post-liberalization growth rate hasn't been able to catch up with the Green Revolution period. But nevertheless, maybe cereals didn't grow, maybe fruit and vegetables grew, maybe livestock grew, other things. And I'm not going into those details now. But crisis for whom and crisis on what? I think this is the question to ask. It is a crisis of incomes for the large majority of wage workers, manual workers, again, I'll come to that in a minute, and also of small farmers. And a book that we did a few years ago called How Do Small Farmers Fare has a lot of data on differences in crop income within the same village. So within the same village, there are some people who've made profits and some who've made losses. I think that is what I'm trying to talk about. That's the difference that we have to look. What is it? What are the constraints faced by those who are making losses from crop production? The last point I want to talk about, but I think something which many of you students would be aware of, is that this inequality in incomes, when we measure it, is very, very clear across caste as well. And again, I've done a paper on this inequality in income and caste, and I've been doing some work on further work on assets and inequality in caste. The systematic pattern in every village, and I'm excluding pure Adivasi villages where the situation is a little different, where you don't have a multi-caste population. The average income of scheduled caste households is lower than of others. So this is not an aberration. It's systematic. Land holdings are lower, asset holdings are lower. So this is clearly the outcome of caste discrimination. And as I said at the beginning, the inequality in agrarian structure in India is very closely, access to land is very closely tied to caste status or the position caste hierarchy per village. Again, this is not to argue that there is no upward mobility or that incomes haven't gone up or that educational opportunities haven't become available. But I think when you look at certain basic parameters, ownership of land, ownership of assets, income of rural households, there's very, very clear persistence of caste bias. Okay. So I think I've gone on too long. My throat is giving me trouble now. So let me conclude and make 2 or 3 points. One is, I urge you students to take whatever issue you study, even if it is the contemporary period, to go back and to look at evidence for a longer term period, to identify what is really happening in the Indian economy. Secondly, to read some of these debates that took place earlier. I mean, what I'm talking about, that a certain path of development would lead to unequalizing growth. This was being written about in 1991 when liberalization was introduced. So there's no point me saying I told you so now, but I think we must learn from these debates, learn from what was said, what was missed out, what was correctly identified. Also, I think as young students, it's very important to question data, to look at what data is capturing and what it's not. As I said, systematic undersampling of the rich. So naturally, measures of inequality are going to be underestimated. You don't need any big statistical analysis to tell you that. Okay? If the very rich are being left out, then clearly the gap is not being measured correctly. The overall point I wanted to make is that the Indian economy, the agricultural economy, is very complex. There are huge variations across regions in India, but we can, I think, say quite firmly, based on evidence, based on empirical evidence, that the whole policies of liberalization since 1991, the last 30 years, have exacerbated inequality in agrarian India. And we don't have any evidence for the last 2 years, but I think all of us have seen hundreds of millions of people lose their job and walk on the streets. And we've also read about the few hundreds who went from millionaires to billionaires or multi-billionaires, owners of IT or Amazon or other, companies which did very well in the lockdown and after. So there's no doubt in my mind that inequality has further worsened in the last 1.5, 2 years over pandemic. And I think for all of you young people, this is something that you will have to be dealing with in your research and in your careers in the coming years. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Swaminathan, for such an enlightening talk. We appreciate having been explained to us in detail the question of inequality in the agrarian and the allied sectors. You talked extensively about the measures of inequality like the Gini coefficient, and it was also insightful to learn about land distribution in India, which still remains the pivotal asset for the population. Finally, we look forward to reading the upcoming book chapter to learn more about the topic. Moving forward, the session is now open for discussion, and you are requested to tap on the raise your hand option for asking questions or for comments. You can also type them out in the chat box. We will wait for a minute or two for questions and comments to come in.
Yes, we're just taking 2 minutes to organize. The questions are coming in.
Can I ask? Okay. Thank you, Professor Swaminathan, for such an enlightening talk this morning. I'm not a student of economics. My interest and the following questions stem particularly from my engagement with agrarian history and environmental history. And historian would say that the region India or the Indian states never actually invested in redistribution of land except in the parts of India like Kashmir and West Bengal, as you said. Would be probably the colonial interest on the land and property relation stemmed particularly from the their obsession with the revenue, because that's upon which the colonial government stood. That was the structure on which the colonial government was particularly functioning. And in the post-colonial period, the revenue was never probably a major contributor to the government's earning. Um, uh, that would probably an economic historian would say, but what would an economist explanation to the reluctance of most of the Indian states not to go for an overhauling of the property relations insofar as the land is concerned, or would it differ, significantly from how an economic historian would, offer an explanation? Uh, that's my question.
Okay, that needs a lecture on land reform, another talk. But thank you for the question. I think I'll be very brief, and I'll refer you to a paper, very a good paper by Mohan Rao and Sirvas Storm, written in a book edited by Terry Byers. See, there were, as I said, Sukhomoy Chakravarti and K.N. Raj, some of the brightest minds in India were discussing agricultural strategy, and in the time of the food crisis, the strategy chosen was to bet on the best in order to increase production quickly. Rather than, and it was very important to increase food production for the urban economy. So it was assumed that agriculture would just be treated as a sector that would supply food cheaply to the urban economy. And in the words of Mohan Rao, it was not seen. It was a failure of planners to see agriculture as a strategic system transforming sector. Okay. And again, the assumption was that, population would lead agriculture, industry would grow. So it was the planning strategy that was chosen. Industrial development would attract workers. But this has not happened. 69% of our population is sitting in rural India. So it is, we can't blame it on the colonial period, we have to take responsibility. I think the Indian, policymakers have to take responsibility. And it was, of course, politically also, it's very important to note, not to, what do you say, not to hurt the balance of political forces, because the rich farmers were supporting the political parties. Okay. And so what was all sections of society, I mean, I'm not a historian, but from what I understand, all sections of society worked together for independence. But after that, this land reform was left to be a legal thing. It was, hundreds of laws were passed, but they were not implemented in most parts of India. And that was clearly a political decision which was taken by those in the ruling parties in different parts of the country. And as we have seen, with a few exceptions of the left governments, it was thought it is too tricky to sort of let's not take away land and redistribute and hurt the rich farmers. So it's clearly a political decision, and I think political scientists, many people, I'm trying to remember, Francine Frankel, and I mean, many people have written about this, that what was the political support. Ashok Mitra, the previous finance minister of West Bengal, has written excellent papers on this. So what were the political forces, and why were people afraid of taking on land reform, except in a few parts of India? I think this is a political and historical question, but which has very serious economic implications.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, we have a couple of questions in the chat box that have come in. The question is from Narayana MCH, and it reads, what is the status of cooperatives in reducing the inequalities in agrarian income?
I'll be very brief. Again, there are very few pockets in India where the cooperatives have worked. So it's very, very uneven. And, we know about cooperatives in Maharashtra, sugarcane cooperatives, and so on. But cooperatives have not really worked in production. We have cooperatives in credit. There are some states like Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra where cooperatives, Kerala, where cooperatives in credit have done reasonably well. But we have not really tried the model of on a large scale. I mean, you have a few examples, Kudumbashree and things like that, but we've not really tried the model of cooperatives in production on any scale in India. So it has not made any difference on incomes.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Asha Kumari Roy, and she writes, in the time of pandemic, how useful are the e-gadgets for students?
Well, you have to ask the students. All I can say is that, sitting and giving lectures rather than standing is very annoying for teachers. But I don't know.
Absolutely, ma'am. Ma'am, as of now, there are no questions coming in. So should we end the session? Should we end the discussion?
This is by yes. Why has sustained rise in output not been able to translate into a rise in incomes? Is inequality the primary cause of for it? Why has sustained rise in output not been able to translate into a rise in incomes?
Oh, this is about the last year, the COVID year, which I mentioned.
Is inequality the primary cause for it? Yes. This is Chandra Bhanu Singh.
Oh,
if you're in the hall,
no,
can you come in to
I've
the
understood-
podium? Or else maybe you can come to the mic. Maybe this is for the last year, the COVID year.
So if I've understood the question, I said that we had record production but not incomes. Yes, there was inequality. And what is the inequality we're talking about? We're talking about, particularly in this case, since it's agricultural production, about small farmers versus large farmers. So there were transport bottlenecks. Getting to markets or mandis was not easy. So what is the price that the producer received on the one hand, and what were the costs? So prices received were highly fluctuating on account of various supply, market issues and transport issues. On the cost side, we have evidence now that a large number of costs went up. Most important, all of you know, price of diesel and petrol has gone up. So fertilizer costs have been going up. Because of COVID restrictions, people wanted to use more machinery or mechanization rather than workers. And costs of machinery went up. In some parts of India, like Bihar, there was all the workers had returned, so wages fell. But in other parts of India, like Punjab, which uses migrant workers, the costs, they had to pay more for workers. So it is the costs of production going up and prices not rising adequately. That is a profit squeeze or an income squeeze. So that's what I'm talking about, that the production may have increased, but if your costs have doubled and your income or gross value of output has not doubled, then you're making less income per unit of land or per unit of output. So this is again something that I've been writing about, that there is a profit squeeze for large sections of rural cultivators and therefore just looking at production without looking at costs. Fertilizer costs are going up. Seeds were not available because of supply chain problems. So costs of many of these inputs went up, and we have evidence on that, and prices did not go up adequately.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question from Ishwari Gopan, and it reads, ma'am, as you said, land is central to Indian inequality, and a serious reason for the transfer of land and property is this still existing institutional barriers in terms of personal laws of property transfers based on lineage, which is being increasingly debated recently, how can these institutions of property transfer and its reform largely dictate the Indian inequality question?
Gosh, so there's a lot about inheritance laws and inequalities in that, particularly in relation to women. And again, that's been written about. And so I think there are two things. I think I'll be very brief. I think we should wind up now. But one is existing land and inheritance and how it's unequal, particularly across men and women, or in some places the eldest son gets it, the others don't, and so on. So that's one. But I think the bigger inequality we're talking about is not that can be addressed by individuals, but which has to be addressed by policy. Okay, so for example, land ceilings. Can we have some people landless and others owning 10,000 or 1,000 hectares? Okay, this is not a question of inheritance, but this is a question of public policy, of land reform policy. And I think we need to keep that distinction in mind. Of course, there are huge gender inequalities, which I didn't touch upon today, and I'm glad it has been raised because it's very serious. You're muted.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one more question from Pallavi Chakravarti, and she says, given that land is mostly acquired through inheritance in India, is the inequality in land ownership due to initial difference in land endowments, or is it something triggered by the land reforms in India? Can we say that there is some kind of complementarity between ownership of land and other assets, since the inequality is still high when we consider all assets together? Ma'am, you need to unmute yourself, ma'am.
Sorry, I was giving an example from Punjab. By law, scheduled caste households are not allowed to own land. So there is your huge inequality already in a village. And you see that persisting today between Jet 6 and Majabi 6, Dalit 6. Huge inequality. So yes, it's historical and it's based. And essentially what we are saying is that, yes, after independence, that law, or I think if it's even before, law on ownership of land by Dalits was removed. But then what is all the historical legacy? How do you address that? People are talking about reparations now in many parts of the world to address historical legacies. And if you go and study rural economies, and particularly study income generation, you find that land is the basis. People build on land. You have some land, so even to run enterprises, non-agricultural land, those who own agricultural land make profits, they're able to buy land. So yes, land is the basis for accumulation of other assets and incomes.
Thank you, ma'am. So we will end our discussion here, given the paucity of time. And so I would like to thank Professor Swaminathan for such a thought-provoking discussion and talk. And I would also like to thank her for leading our GRM discussions with a keynote address and setting the tone for the upcoming days. Thank you so much, ma'am. And also a big thank you to the audience for being with us. I once again welcome you all to the Graduate Research Meet 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best for the meet.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
Did you take screenshots? Because we need it for our webpage. Okay, it's done now.
I request everyone in the hall to go to the foyer area for the tea.